Welcome to The Forum, your modern-day coffee house, where ideas can be birthed, exchanged, and wrestled with. We celebrate questions, conversation, and reason as powerful tools to enlighten hearts and transform minds, shaping a new generation of thinkers, innovators, and pioneers. We're glad you're here, so pull up a chair and let's begin.
So this morning I'm going to talk about the hidden rules, how emotion, trauma, and worthiness drive what we do. So often when I try and think of a topic to discuss at the forum, I've started trying to really look at what it is I'm experiencing at the moment, because for me, I find my best form of communication is to speak from what I'm learning and from the heart, really, and what I'm walking through, because I'm much better in that sort of personal experience. So most recently, so what I've been going through recently is I signed up for a program called the Nourish Method. So I'm actually going to share some quite private stuff with you today, but I'm happy to, it's fine. And I signed up to this program called the Nourish Method by local fitness and well-being coach Katie Miles. And what it's about learning about your relationship with food, dieting, exercise, and it was a 6-week program which really deep dived into the emotional impacts of childhood stuff and upbringing and what's maybe resulted in my relationship with food as an adult. And hopefully Katie actually is going to be joining us on a midweek evening at the forum, because I think her stuff is so good. I think a lot of people would really enjoy it. She really thinks about the emotional sort of mindsets we can have around this stuff. So hopefully she'll be coming in the new year to teach some of her philosophies with us all. In the program, we explore and discuss my relationship with food and emotional eating. And I found it incredibly enlightening, and I was actually genuinely surprised by some of the stuff that I learned. Mainly one being the rules that I have around food and the hidden rules I had. So I'm really struggling to read this. It's a bit dark on the stage. Could we brighten it a bit? I don't know if that's possible. So yeah, the main one being the rules that I've established around food and the hidden rules that I actually had no idea I was living by. And it was like a light came on. It's like I woke up to the fact that my upbringing, social conditioning, cultural narratives around me, and the emotional baggage I'd accumulated around the topic were forming rules that I'd been subconsciously living by. Stuff like, I don't know, certain rules might be, you have to eat 3 meals a day. You have to eat your breakfast. You have to finish your plate. You can't waste food. It's better to be thin. Healthy means small. Have food at this time. Don't eat big foods during the week. Carbs are the enemy. I mean, all this shit that we've been fed over the years. And it doesn't sound actually too dramatic to maybe some of you in here. But for me, what I'd realised is I'd built a structure of rules and dogmas that when I challenged it, I actually had a physical reaction to. I'd feel quite anxious and about certain situations and changes in regards to that stuff. For example, and I feel like I'm going to sound like a crazy lady, but James suggested we had Mexican on Tuesday last week. And I was like, we can't have Mexican on a Tuesday, that's a weekend food. And he looked at me like I was mad. And it was like, and I heard myself, and I saw it. I saw that I'd created this weird rule that, like, midweek is more like, balanced, healthy, and not that enchiladas aren't, but I'd sort of fed myself this thing that's more of a Saturday thing. And I caught myself saying it, and I'm saying this actually in jest because me and James did laugh about it. But my point being is, it got me thinking, oh jeez. Right. I'm just going to leave that there. This is not going well. Right. So it got me thinking, how much do we actually live like this? I mean, I'm making a joke of it, but some of this stuff we can do subconsciously because we've been fed so much stuff in our lives that we start to believe that there's certain hidden rules we have to live by. So how much do we do this without even realizing in other areas of our lives? And I'm someone who's actually done quite a lot of work on myself. And I'm still seeing areas of my life where trauma, conditioning, and emotions have created patterns, routines, and rules that I live by. And that sometimes to change or challenge that can feel uncomfortable. And we know that full well here, don't we? We've had a whole change in our belief systems and where we've come from, and within our Christian journey, we've really shifted in that. And that felt uncomfortable because you believed these things to be true. I mean, have you ever wondered why you might make the same choices again and again, your routines, your patterns, even when maybe you know better? Like why we overspend, why we can overeat, overwork, get in our heads about stuff, pick a fight with your partner, feel anxiety towards certain relationships and friendships, seek to control with our kids, even when we promised ourselves not to. I was literally saying this morning to Jenny and Gemma that I woke up this morning in a funk, decided, right, this afternoon we need to do something with the kids. We've got to get out, we've got to do something. Because something was telling me, this rule was telling me that we can't have another day at home. We've got to get out and do something. And this is what I'm trying to say. Like, my narrative was then feeding this sort of negative energy into the house because I had this rule that somehow we have to do something more. And I don't know what was telling me that. And it could be that our emotions and not logic are writing the rules for us around even the simplest everyday stuff, like money, parenting, food, success, time management, and even love and relationships. And what Katie's program did for me is it really shone a light on this and really made me take a step back and to pause and look at how I may be doing this in other areas of my life and food. And it's been actually quite fascinating to see how emotions can rise up when I'm dealing with certain things. And I mean, I can't necessarily unpack 46 years of emotional rulemaking in a matter of even weeks or half an hour this morning. But what I can do, and what we can all do, is learn to use our consciousness to help reshape these experiences and emotions moving forward. And when I talk about some of the topics I do, I'm not here to say, right, this 30-minute talk will change how you live forever. But what I am trying to achieve is to help us maybe just take a moment to learn and to reflect on ourselves and open up new thoughts and ideas that might help grab a moment in your life and say, actually, what's going on here? Because this stuff can just be so ticking over in the background, and then we wonder why certain things aren't figuring out, why certain relationships aren't working, why you're not feeling good about yourself in that area, why you're not feeling content at work. And along with Katie's work, I've looked into the thoughts and research of other experts in this field, one being Tori Dunlap, who Heather recommended to me. She's a financial feminist who shows how money is emotional before it's mathematical. So I'm going to be talking a bit about finance and how this can work in that area. A guy called Bessel Kolk, who's a trauma expert, who's done decades of research in this, and he believes and has revealed how unprocessed and emotions and trauma live in the body, that you physically have, oh my God, you physically carry that. And then we've got Brené Brown, who teaches how worthiness and shame are at the core of why we behave as we do. So along with my own thoughts and experiences, I'm going to use what I've learned from them to help kind of visualize that and explain it and back it. So let's unpack this. Let's go. Yeah. So it's no great mystery to know that our childhood and upbringing is a massive part of who we are and shapes how we behave as adults. As children, we learn emotional lessons disguised as rules, such as don't waste money. That can potentially create a fear of spending. Finish your plate. A social conditioning resulting in eating beyond fullness. Be the best you can be. Worthiness based on achievement. And we all know that you're often celebrated, aren't you, as a child, when you do something well. We get a lot of input when we do things right, don't we? So we can start to form this belief and see that our achievements are what create pride and acceptance. And stuff like that doesn't sound that bad, and most of us have probably experienced this, but put that alongside cultural narratives that we grew up with, like for a lot of us in here, 90s diet culture, or gender stereotypes around money, post-war conditions around not being wasteful with food, staying strong, men don't cry, women are frivolous, the caregivers, or even more relevant to many of us in here this morning, the church religious culture that we grew up in. You know, that when things are going well, it means God's looking out for you. And when things are tough, then the devil's on your back. Or you're not believing things right. You need more faith. You need to give it to God. And all that intertwines with our upbringing will create rules for survival. We create our own rules and shapes how we regulate our emotions now. For example, maybe someone who grew up with unpredictability might cling to control, excessive budgeting, dieting, seeking perfection. How finances were managed in your house will be having an impact on how you manage your money now. Language that was used around food and body image will be affecting how you see yourself. Work ethics. Maybe your dad was a workaholic, always at the office or at the building site or whatever. And you've seen that this is a model on how to manage your time and family life. You know, many of us here were likely to have grown up with a male provider role and a female caregiver. And that may be influencing now how you view your parenting roles within your house and your marriages and how you manage your housework and day-to-day stuff. You know, even within the church environment, you know, many of us grew up with these rules that created a shame, perhaps around sexuality or, you know, getting things wrong. It's all going to be different for each of us. And it's hard to give specific examples because of that, because not all this stuff always equals bad. But my point is, we've created rules and standards that we live and honour, which may well be wonderful, but there could be some stuff in there that perhaps is no longer serving you. And it may be the reason you have complications in your relationships, issues around weight, anxiety around spending money, as examples. And through these experiences and conditioning, we have all, on some level, developed an emotional build-up and are carrying feelings that may be from some of us trauma, from discipline that we might have had as children, from boundaries created for us. And as a result, we've created these rules that we live by, often subconsciously, to help control our behaviour and establish structures and routines and patterns in everyday life. So then, when you feel out of control in a situation, your emotions will always seek to regain it so we feel okay again, because we don't like that uncomfortable space. And I've said it many times before, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. Our stress response kicks in, and we need to get back to that place of safety. However, if that place of safety has potentially come from a skewed perspective, we can be becoming reliant on a foundation of developed habits and rules which are not fully aligned with maybe who we are now and how we want to grow. So we become stuck in these patterns or routines of emotional behaviour that's keeping us from moving on and growing. This then determines how we show up for ourselves and what we tell ourselves. For example, you know, where have these emotional rules come from? Maybe you're someone who got into debt, so you now think you can't manage money well, or you've been told not. If you're someone who's often late, you may now believe that you're unreliable. If you struggle with procrastination, you'll tell yourself, I'm just a last-minute person. You can't lose weight, even though you want to. You tell yourself you've got no willpower and self-control. I'm so bored of people saying it's about willpower. No, it is not. You find relationships hard. Maybe you tell yourself you're unlovable. You find supporting your partner hard when things feel difficult. You might see yourself as selfish or weak. You can find your kids hard work at times and it feels overwhelming. You maybe believe you're not being a good parent, or someone's made you feel like that. Some narrative's making you feel like that. Doubting your choices or being indecisive. That's come from not knowing how to trust yourself and make a good decision. Your work-life balance feels overwhelming and you may strive for perfectionism. You're believing your work is never enough and you can't ever be good enough. Or maybe you disproportionately react to seemingly trivial comments. This can highlight a sensitivity to feeling criticized and not enough. And these are all examples of how, through certain circumstances and narratives, trust has been broken because somewhere along the line in an area of your life, you've been made to feel that you are not enough. Tough words, but maybe you'll be able to take this back to an obvious point in your life where maybe a trauma happened, where a lot of this stuff can come from. Or for many of us, it might be the small things, the comments, the parentage, the social expectations that have led you to consistently doubt yourself and somehow lose your own trust and self-belief. Maybe just take a minute to think of a time that maybe you felt this. This is what's called your trauma imprint. A trauma response to conditioning we have developed so we learn to shut ourselves off and create control mechanisms and rules and values to help us feel stable. And talking about trauma might feel extreme for some of you within the topics of food and money, but it's not. It's so true. And even this week, I was having a just day-to-day conversation with a friend who told me that when she was 13 years old, her mum put her on a diet. And this meant that from an early age, what probably felt like just an okay choice to make for her has developed a very unhealthy relationship to food and to her own self-worth. Because what maybe to some might feel like something that was quite an acceptable boundary and a healthy thing to do has created decades of self-doubt over food choices. This is where disordered eating can come from. Alcohol abuse, drug reliance, debt, escapism TV, social media addiction, body dysmorphia, broken relationships, trust issues, procrastination. If you don't know how to love yourself properly, then you're going to struggle to trust yourself to show up for you, and you're not going to look after yourself maybe in the way that you'd like to. Because our values come into conflict. And our values are so important here. And a year or so ago, I talked about values and how what we believe are our core values can often be intercepted by our default values that have come from all this stuff I'm talking about this morning. For example, the value for me maybe of not wasting food and finishing your plate. Is that a value I want to hold, or is that a value I've been given? Does it align with my goals now? Is the food better in me or in the bin? If my actual value is to be healthy and feel good about myself, does finishing my plate serve that? Then if or when I do overeat or I fall into a binge and restrict pattern, I can then berate myself and develop a belief that I can't trust myself. And then I need to find a control mechanism or a rule to stick to instead because I don't believe I can trust myself. What about with our spending, our money stories? Are we spending to seek comfort, relief, validation? Do we save to seek safety from uncertainty? And do we view debt as shameful? Do we avoid it and see ourselves as unworthy if we have it? Have we developed a value system that has taught us a certain way to manage our finances? I mean, even talking about this, some of us will feel uncomfortable because we don't talk about money. You don't talk about money. There's shame attached to it. It's weird. Have we developed a value system that has taught us a certain way? Your emotional reactions to any of these things, spending, saving, debt, will certainly highlight that for you. You know, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my financial story. You know, growing up, when I was younger, my parents were struggling. I remember my mum writing every little single thing we were spending every day. She was really on it, making sure that we weren't wasting money and we were doing things, you know, within our means. And then when my dad was in his 40s, he got a promotion. We came to York and he got this big, this big wage coming in, and it's like everything just changed. And it was at an age in my life when I was about 7 or 8, which is where really a lot of this subconscious patterning is formed. So now as an adult, I've got this kind of weird mindset around money where I'm trying to be like really savvy and tight with it, and I'm almost like scared to spend it. But then on the other hand, we went to Florida for 3 weeks in the summer, you know. There's this sort of weird kind of opposites going on where I don't feel fully comfortable in either role. And I've realized that somehow it's because this pattern around around finance has kind of created this sort of value system around money that I'm not quite sure where I fit. And it's good to see that, because it makes me understand that and now think, okay, I'm aware of that now. And Tori Dunlap, who I mentioned, frames money in this way. She said it's a tool for empowerment and equality. And in her book, The Financial Feminist, she talks about how emotions and money are deeply connected. She explores and exposes how cultural narratives and societal roots in gender discrimination have an impact on how women and men have been shaped in specific areas when it comes to managing money. It tends to be that the men are encouraged to push for wages, you know, push for promotions, to save, to be providers, and women a little bit more the caregivers. And this is what she believes. And you know, we're potentially a bit more frivolous with money. And she sort of challenges that. And she teaches that being aware of your emotional relationship with money, such as feelings of guilt, shame, fear, or anxiety, can help you make better choices financially. And what Dunlap encourages us to do is to look at value-based spending. Ask yourself what generally aligns with your values now. Travel, your uni fund, retirement, experiences, not spending money on what numbs emotion or performs worthiness. Buy the designer label because you want to, not because you believe it gives you status or makes you feel worthy. Buy the bag because it brings you joy, not because you fear missing out. Take the trip because you want the experience, and don't not do it because you fear leaving your comfort zone or you have a fear of spending. Understanding our money and finances in a healthy, established way, and being able to enjoy all that your hard work has brought you, instead of wasting money on stuff you don't need or want. Realigning your values. Because when we're working from a value system, we need to be sure the value system is actually reflective on who we are now and where we want to grow, and not something else. A hidden narrative or lack of trust and self-belief. What emotion shows up when you think about your bank account? Fear, pride, guilt, relief? What emotions show up when you think about your appearance? Shame, love, embarrassment? Where have these emotions come from? Can you take yourself back to a narrative formed and your body, where your body is stored, an emotional memory? Do you have a physical reaction when you think about some of these stuff? Do you feel it in here, in your stomach, or people listening online, or in your throat, that anxiety? Do you physically feel something when you think about some of this stuff? So I'm just going to show a clip now with Bessel van der Kolk. And I'll follow on with some of his research next.
I don't think anybody's ever come to see me for the first time because of their trauma. They come to see because my relationships aren't working out, or I cannot sleep, or I get so angry and I don't know why. But basically, trauma is being lived out in the present. as heartbreaking and gut-wrenching sensations. The event that happened is in fact over, but your mind and your sensations keep reliving it, acting like it, feeling like it. Those are automatic reactions of that core part of the brain having to do with survival. So you cannot talk yourself out of feeling this way. You need to have visceral experiences that are different. Create a state in the mind where the mind is able to absorb new ways of looking at things. By expanding our perception box, we can really get to see that the reality that you live in is much bigger than the constructs we have created for ourselves to make sense out of the world.
I love that clip about expanding your perspective box. What Bessel van der Kolk's research focuses on is trauma and how trauma affects the brain, body, and behaviour. He shows that traumatic experiences and conditioning is not just psychological, but we store these things physically in the body. This influences how we think, how we feel, and how we react long after some of these events. His book, The Body Keeps Score, and I love that title, I think that's a great title, explains how traumas disrupt the brain's ability to regulate emotion and creates bodily sensations of fear and numbness long after the event has passed. He believes that trauma isn't just what happened, it's what happens inside of us as a result. So when we can't regulate those emotions, we regulate it through behaviour. Overspending to escape, overeating to comfort, overworking to create safety, emotional narratives shaping behaviour. Healing, he believes, means learning to feel safe enough in our bodies to pause before reacting, to choose differently instead of repeating a behaviour. He encourages to go back to the roots of why. Where did the emotion come from? What story have you believed about yourself? And taking time to pause and find the why can be so helpful. And that's what I've been doing a little bit with my journey, with what I've been learning, is now when I reach for something, I think, where is that coming from? What's that about? What am I feeling? Because pausing and asking yourself that can maybe sometimes help you stop some of these automatic patterns. I'm going to knock that off again. So when you go to spend money, just pause and ask yourself, is there an emotion at play? What is that? Where is that? Why is that there? What do I want to do about that? It might not matter. It might do. The same with eating. When I want to eat, am I hungry? If no, then why am I reaching for food? Is there an emotion I'm feeling? And when I did this with the Nourish Method, I found a lot of my moments of wanting food came from a feeling of anxiety. We had a week where we had to, every time we wanted to eat, we had to ask ourselves, what am I feeling? Sometimes it was just, I'm just hungry and I need to eat. And other times I was like, well, I'm not. And almost always my emotions was attached to anxiety, which I found really fascinating. I was feeling anxious, so then I was just mindlessly reaching for food. And not necessarily for comfort, but more out of habit. And it made me remember that years ago, when I was going through a really hard time after the death of my brother, I just really struggled to eat. I went through years of really struggling to get up on a morning and eat breakfast and look after myself. So my blood sugar levels would be really low. And similarly, after I had George, I had a bit of a struggle. I do wonder if I had some postnatal depression, if I'm honest. But I'd struggle with looking after myself. My mum would say to me, your blood sugar levels are low, you need to eat. And so I'd feel, and I would feel incredibly anxious, so I'd need to kind of eat to help give my body the nutrition it needed. And I had to learn to make myself eat in order to look after myself. But fast forward to now, and I am still subconsciously doing that, but I am no longer in that headspace of need. So what's happened is my body has stored the feelings from that trauma, and my emotions have created a pattern of behaviour that I'm now living by, that when I feel anxious, I need to make sure I eat. But I don't actually need that anymore. I don't need to be doing that anymore. So I'm living by an old set of rules and an attempt at regulation that no longer serves me. And in actual fact, are giving me an unbalanced pattern of eating, because I don't need that. So when I was doing this without understanding the why, I was learning not to trust myself and doubted my choices in that area. So by taking the time now to pause and ask myself, am I hungry? I'm better able to follow my body in a conscious way that allows me to understand what it needs and also trust myself to make choices which will benefit me and align with my current values. So that's just me giving you an example of how this has worked practically. And this is what Bessel's research shows us, that conditioning has developed a way of strong emotions, of storing emotions that stuck with us in a certain time, but take a moment to stop and reflect and see where that came from, why it was there, and do I need to feel that now? And if not, then try to change the response and break the pattern. On to Brené Brown, which has got another clip to show you.
It's not fear that gets in the way of us being brave with our lives and our work. It's armor. Everybody's afraid. It's okay to be afraid. What's dangerous is the armor that we reach for to self-protect when we're afraid, and how that armor moves us away from love, connection, and our values. I think the hardest work is, for me, constantly being aware of what is my armor. What am I grabbing for when I'm afraid? What am I grabbing for when I want to protect my sense of self-worth, my ego, and how heavy that is. At some point, I had to wear it because that was survival for me growing up. This is the big developmental milestone of middle age, which is kind of when the universe grabs you by the shoulders and pulls you really close and says, I'm not around anymore. I gave you gifts. Choosing not to grow into them is not benign. There's a consequence for that, and your armor is getting in the way. You have different choices. Let go of what doesn't serve. And that is the big milestone, I think, that we have to wrestle with in midlife. What no longer serves, that's preventing us from growing into who we want to be.
The self-protection armour. I loved that metaphor. This is the hidden rules we've developed and have worn heavily because at a time we needed them for survival. But that armour can move you away from love, connection, and your values. The self-protection we formed through our emotional trauma. There's a quote that she says, "You can either walk inside your story and own it, or you can stand outside of it, hustling for your worthiness." So we've explored this morning how I believe we could all live by emotional rules that we didn't consciously choose, quiet agreements we've made with the selves to feel safe and accepted, the self-protective armour. If I work hard enough, I'll be worthy. If I stay strong, if I stay in control, nothing can fall apart. If I control my spending, my body, my schedule, I'll finally feel enough. We've learnt to see that our worthiness can come through these beliefs of control and overachievement, trying to prove we are enough instead of believing we already are. Brené's teachings on worthiness show us that it is not earned, but it's claimed. It's about letting go at what doesn't serve us anymore so we can grow. She shows us that worthiness is not something that is earned through success, approval, and perfection. It's something we already possess. And this echoes, doesn't it, the values of Q and the forum, that you always start from a place of value and worth. And that when you're able to live with a strong sense of this truth, that we start from wholeness and love, then even when we make mistakes or fail, we can still believe we are enough. We rewrite the script. So in conclusion this morning, I want us to understand how to reclaim our stories, retell our narratives, and expose the emotional rules we have created so we can learn a new way to love and to trust ourselves. Because the more tightly we cling on to these emotional rules, the further we can drift from the peace that we're actually seeking. And when we learn to feel enough, to love and to trust ourselves from that place, we will no longer be held to those emotional rules, and we begin to make choices from grounded emotion and in the moment logic. So I've got some pointers and takeaways for us this morning. Number 1, practice the pause and open your awareness. Just stop sometimes in areas that maybe you feel there's an emotional feeling there. And it might take you a bit of time to see that in some of these topics we've discussed. Practice the pause. Stop and recognize when you think you're outworking an emotional rule. See if you can catch yourself in the act. 2, try and recognize the emotions at play and its triggers. Notice where the emotion lives in your body. What do I feel when I want to pick up my phone and scroll? When I want to eat? When I want to spend money? When I want to work late? When I'm trying to pick that fight? When I'm feeling in a funk? Where has that emotion come from? Try and see its trigger, because it might help you think, is that something that aligns with me now? 3, speak to yourself with empathy. Be kind to yourself. Because some of these rules and triggers we've discussed can breed shame. And shame will want to keep you silent, as that's where it thrives and finds its power. Money, food, trauma, these emotions related to that can be such taboo subjects that we don't talk about. We carry the shame in these areas. So meet that part of you with compassion, speak kindness to yourself, and try and move on. Help yourself move through the emotion instead of letting it sit in you. 4, find alignment. Make choices that reflect your values now. Ask yourself, what are my goals now? My values now? Is what I am doing coming from a place of trust, or from an old value system that I no longer want, that's no longer serving what it is I want now? And 5, make your choice. You have the power to change the rules by making a different choice. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. There's not like this isn't a one fixed thing. This is patterns of behavior that we're trying to change. But you can do that by making little choices, by doing these 5 steps that might help you refocus your attention a bit and change your perspective. For example, I can't spend on myself, or I'm bad with money. Change that to, I'll invest into what brings me joy. Or I can practice positive saving and spend money on that trip that I want. I can't eat that, or I'll get fat. Maybe to, I can enjoy tasty food and know my limits. It's about reframing the rule to a value and reclaiming your worth. So when we feel safe in our bodies, worthy in our hearts, and aligned in our values, we stop reacting to those old emotional rules and start writing new ones. So I'm going to open up the floor now for some discussion and reflection time. So we've got, what time? Oh, there we go, perfect. We've got 20 minutes, and if you want to stay beyond, that's fine. We close at 12. And I've actually got some homework for you. I've done some sheets that you can either have a look at now or take home with you and have a think about there. Just some practical steps on how to maybe try and diagnose this stuff in you. And so we're going to take about 20 minutes. I think, is the coffee shop going to be open? I'm not sure. Maybe. I think we're going to be open for coffee. But thank you very much for being here this morning, for supporting us here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the morning. So I've got some questions in the reflection time for you to consider. Think of an area where emotions drive your behaviour. What emotion sits underneath this? What is it trying to protect? And what way can you reclaim that area and rewrite the emotional rule? Thanks very much.